Okay, good evening, everybody, here in person and out on Zoom. We're going to get started. My name is Jack McCarthy. I'm the president of the Friends of Northeast Philadelphia History. We are the group that sponsors these meetings. The meetings are the Northeast Philadelphia History Network, which is a group of people that get together that love local history. We meet here the first Wednesday of every month from September through May. So this is our last regular meeting. And then in June, we have a site visit to a historic site, the first Wednesday of June. And that will be at the new Grand Army of the Republic Civil War Museum and Library in Holmesburg. Many of you know that the GAR was in Frankfurt for many, many years. And now they've recently moved to Holmesburg, and they have a new museum and library. So we'll be touring that. We'll be meeting. What is the first Wednesday in June? I forget the date, but whatever it is. The 7th? Okay, we'll be meeting there at 6:30. We usually meet here at 7. And then we take off for the summer, July and August, and we will start back up in September. So the Friends of Northeast Philadelphia History is a 501c3 nonprofit. We preserve and promote Northeast Philadelphia history. We sponsor these meetings. We collect archives and artifacts on local history. We publish books. We have special events. We have a biennial Northeast Philadelphia History Fair, which we're going to have in April of 2024. The way we communicate all this is through our email list, and a email list is going, sign-in sheet is going around, I think. Julie, do you have that? Okay, so Julie's in charge of the list. So there's a sign-in sheet going around. If you're not on our email list, please put your email on there, or the other way is through our Facebook page, which is the Northeast Philadelphia History Network Facebook page. If you follow that, you'll get notices that way. I checked today, we have 3,600 and some followers on Facebook, and we have 960 some people on our email list. So we have quite an organization going here. I do want to acknowledge our board members who put in a lot of work this year. I'm the president. Maureen Green is the vice president. I don't know where she is.
She's there.
Fred, no, there's Maureen. Fred Moore, our treasurer, who does all the work. Janine Pollock, our secretary. Bob Palmer, our board member. Lou Leskis, our board member. Patty O'Connor McCarthy, our board member. These are the people who do all the work to put all these events on. So we look forward to seeing you at future meetings and stay in touch with us. What did I want to say? Oh yeah, all our programs are recorded and posted on our YouTube channel, so you can watch all our programs through that as well. And a couple of announcements. The Friends of the Ryers Museum are trying to get their elevator fixed so that people can see their collections on the upper floors. It's a spectacular museum in Fox Chase Burholm, and their elevator is not in service, so people with ambulatory problems can't really see their exhibits. They're petitioning the city to get the elevator fixed, and there's an online petition. There's flyers that'll be out on the desk out front that you can find the link to sign that, and hopefully allow more people to see their great collections. And then there's going to be a historic graveyard tour at Trinity Oxford Church on Saturday, May 20th at 1:30. Debbie Clack over there will give you information on that. So after we're done here, we will have desserts and drinks and networking and conversation. So please stay for that. Now, before we start tonight, I want to introduce Sam Katz, who is spearheading a new initiative, the Philadelphia Histories Collaborative, that is hoping to.
I'm muted.
Please, whoever you are, please mute on Zoom. Sam will explain this new collaborative that's going to seek to revitalize and support the greater Philadelphia history network and sector. That's Patty.
Greetings, everyone. How are we doing? Thank you. You're probably not used to seeing me in this context, but I've seen some street signs around, so I know there's an election in Northeast Philly. Anyway, many of you know I've been producing documentary films on the history of Philadelphia, and if you don't know that, they're on YouTube, Philadelphia, the Great Experiment. I've been working with history organizations for 15 years and have noticed that in the arts and culture food chain, if you will, history has kind of taken a low place on the totem pole. People are not studying history in college. It's not required. PhDs in history are in decline. Social studies is out of vogue. STEM is in. History matters. So the Histories Collaborative of Philadelphia, which is about 40 organizations, most of which are history oriented, has been formed in order to try to advocate for history. And there are a couple things that we're going to try to do, and I'll be very brief because I think we all want to hear from Patty. There's a history month for virtually everything. There's no Philadelphia History Month. And today I had a conversation with some people at the school district, and I intend to talk to other school organizations, the Catholic schools, the independent schools, the charter schools, because if we had a May Philadelphia History Month, every kid in Philadelphia could be invited to do something about his or her own history or the history of the
his, her, or their.
I agree with that, whatever that was. You all know the Philadelphia History Museum closed in 2018. And so one of the other things that we're thinking of doing is to try to create a digital history museum. And finally, a campaign for histories, because we all have them. So Jack is a member of our board. I just wanted to come over first because I wanted to learn more about the founding of the Northeast and Torresdale and this historic church. But I wanted to bring that message to you that we are, I think this is a campaign I can win. Making history matter. And I look forward to having all of your support. So thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Yes, I'm involved in the Histories Collaborative. I'm happy to be part of that. Yeah, for some reason, the camera is not picking up the speaker. Well, I'm not seeing it here, but okay. Anyway, so the people out in Zoom land maybe won't have the pleasure of seeing Patty's face as she talks, but Patty has been researching Torresdale forever, and I can attest to the exhaustive amount of work that she's put into this, and as so much that actually it's going to have to be a two-part presentation. The second part will have to come next season because she just has too much material for one session. And I can also attest that she is scrupulously and vociferously dedicated to historical accuracy. She does not write or say a syllable that cannot be verified by some documentary source. So everything you're going to hear today, unlike many other sources, which she tells me all the time, she finds inaccuracies all over the place, but everything you're going to hear tonight is accurate. So without further ado, Patty O'Connor McCarthy.
For listening.
Thank you. As Jack said, this was supposed to be a more inclusive presentation. It's called Torresdale Privileged Enclave, Elite Resort, and Residential Community. It is mostly about the elite resort part of it. I'll touch on the privileged enclave a little, but that's going to be in part 2 that maybe will be in October. There was just so much, and I personally find it all fascinating. I hope you do too. Okay, we're looking at a map of the County of Philadelphia from actual survey by Charles Ellett, Jr., 1843. This section of the map encompasses the land from 11 Mile Island, which is Linden Avenue, north to the Pequesson Creek, and from the Delaware River to the SEPTA Amtrak Railroad line. As you can see, there are only two owners shown on this map. One was the Morgan Bakehouse property to the left, and the other was John Risden's property. John Risden owned a 3-story brick hotel, tavern. He owned farmland and ran a ferry service from this location. The hotel was sometimes referred to as the Robin Hood Hotel. However, it was also referred to as Risden's Hotel or Risden's Ferry Hotel. It was a gentleman-only hotel where men came by steamboat up the Delaware River and were brought to shore by the rowboat ferry service that Risden owned. It brought them to the hotel and the tavern, and men would spend their time at Risden's by fishing for the Delaware River's famous shad, hunting, shooting, and fraternizing. Risden purchased the land in 1935 and operated his business for 15 years. 1835, sorry. In 1850, Charles McAllister purchased 84 of John Risden's 110 acres of land. He had been a merchant, but in 1849, he retired from day-to-day work and became a banker, a broker, and a real estate entrepreneur. So it doesn't sound like he had much relaxation in his retirement. McAllister was a savvy businessman, a loving relative, a loyal friend, and an advisor to presidents. McAllister had great plans for his purchase. He built an ornate summer home in the northernmost part of the Risden land. He called this home Glengarry after an ancestral home in Scotland. But his plan was much bigger than a home. He was planning to create a neighborhood. He wanted his neighborhood to consist of residents that were relatives, business associates, and friends. This plan would make it likely that the neighbors would indeed be neighborly and that the neighborhood would be a great success. This painting here is from Glen Ford, and it's the only known image of the original Glengarry. He called his neighborhood Tarsdale after another ancestral home in Scotland. You can see from this 1855 map that in addition to McAllister, there were 6 families established in Tarsdale within 5 years of McAllister's purchase of the land. Most of the new owners were wealthy merchants of McAllister's age. One of the houses, you can see it says Hopkins, was gifted to his 2 nieces, Fanny and Emily McAllister. Their parents, one of McAllister's sisters, Emily, and her husband, Nicholas Hopkins, lived with them. As you can also see, it's not very clear, but to the right, right under Welling, it says Grant, and that was Samuel Grant. And Grant Avenue, or Grant Street at that time, was named after him. A lot of people think it was named after President Grant, but it's actually after Samuel Grant. There are people that didn't stay in the area that long because they died. They were elderly when they bought it. McKee is one of them, Farnham is one of them, and Vezin, which you can only make out the V-E-Z. And he actually bought Risden's Ferry, the hotel. He lived there until he died. And then it was bought by another Hopkins, Edward McAllister Hopkins, son of the people that lived across the street that I just talked about, Emily and Nicholas. And he was nephew to Charles McAllister. He tore down the original Risden's Ferry and built a great house that he lived in for many, many years. right, this isn't real clear here, but this is giving you an idea. On the left is the 1855 map that we were just talking about. And this is what it looked like in 1887. It was a little bit more plotted out. You can see where it says Edward Hopkins, right below Tarsdale in the Tarsdale Landing. Edwin Fittler, ex-mayor and owner of the rope works with his name. He owned a very large property. William Rawle Brown, George Smith, his father, Thomas Kilby Smith, a general, had already died, but he had lived in the house. And of course, Charles McAllister, but at this point in time, you'll notice it's his estate. It isn't his home anymore. So the map, it illustrates all this, the ownership of these properties. And you can tell, as I just said, that McAllister had passed away. His home and grounds were inherited by his daughter Lily after his death. Most of the original, not most, but a lot of the original owners had passed away. New residents replaced them, and other families who were first-time owners in Tarsdale had moved in around this time. In January 1889, Louise Bouvier Drexel, wealthy heiress and daughter of the late Francis Drexel and Emma Bouvier, married Edward DeVoe Morel, lawyer and son of Ida Powell Morel and deceased lawyer Edward Morel. Mrs. Morel, Edward's mother, had married a prominent corporate lawyer, John G. Johnson, after her husband passed away. Both Louise and Edward were raised in privilege and luxury. Because of the desirability and cachet of living in Tarsdale at that time in history, most wealthy people living in or moving to this area wanted a Tarsdale address. As a result, homes considered Tarsdale could now be found as far south as Linden Avenue and as far north as just the present day, just below the present day Woodhaven Road along Knights Road. This information is according to land descriptions on deeds of that time period. The recently purchased Morel home that they called San Jose, which you see pictured here, stood in present-day Morel Park. At the time, it was referred to as being in Tarsdale. Edward DeVoe Morel was a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, class of 1885. He was admitted to the bar in 1887, was a successful lawyer, astute businessman, a colonel in the 3rd Regiment of the National Guard of Pennsylvania, was commissioned Brigadier General of the 1st Brigade, a member of Philadelphia's Select City Council, Republican member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. Morel did not keep any business papers, journals, or diaries. There's quite a bounty of information in newspapers, and most of the information in this presentation comes from newspapers, atlases, and deeds. About 40 years, you see, well, that's really late. About 40 years after Charles McAllister began selling property to create his neighborhood, Edward Morel began to buy the same property for the purpose of creating a resort. He purchased much of the property from owners who would make a considerable profit on their initial investment. The remaining properties were purchased from real estate brokers who had recently bought properties from the estates of the recently deceased. Charles McAllister's daughter Lily had inherited Glengarry and was not selling that property. Morel was not buying any of the Tarsdale properties south of Fittler Street. This 1894 map shows the ownership in McAllister's Tarsdale after Morel purchases. Now, I don't have a pointer or anything, but there's basically in what was Charles McAllister's Tarsdale, which I explained was river to railroad, and it was Eden Street up to the creek. There was only one small property that Edward Morel did not purchase. So basically, he owned everything other than Glengarry and that one small property. Just as McAllister wanted to create an ideal neighborhood in this bucolic setting, Morel wanted to build a state-of-the-art resort. He did not have to waste any time getting things off the ground. His first step was a source of electricity and heat for the resort. In December 1891, Morel and others applied for a charter for the Tarsdale Electric Light and Power Company. In February 1892, Morel acquired a controlling interest in the Upper Delaware River Transportation Company. This was a steamship company that ran excursions several times daily back and forth from the Port of Philadelphia to Trenton, with stops in both Pennsylvania and New Jersey. The company consisted of the steamships Columbia, John A. Warner, and Twilight. The steamships would provide a relaxing first-class ride from the Port of Philadelphia or any of the other stops to the Morelton Inn. The Morelton Inn Orchestra, led by George Woodall, played on the Columbia on the 2 p.m. trip to the inn, to the delight of the passengers. The on-site work began on April 28, 1892. The architect, Charles M. Burns, redrafted the plans several times, each time making the inn larger per Morel's request. The old Hopkins mansion, which was owned by Edward McAllister Hopkins, would be expanded by a 146-foot by 50-foot building and 2 wings. Other properties, including the Bory and Fisher houses, would be remodeled to become part of the resort by contractor John Duncan, and Morel also hired Duncan to erect 7 large lawn cottages. Now, that last map was not very good, but the Bory and Fisher homes were, when you go into Glen Ford now, right as you go into the driveway through the gates, the Bory home was to your right and the Fisher home was to your left. They were actually within Glen Ford's boundaries, what they are now. Bory also had extended property on the other side of Grant Avenue that went from Milner Street back further. The Morelton Inn had a soft opening on June 1st, 1892. The grand opening was June 13th, 1892. 1,000 gentlemen guests attended, consisting of politicians, including the mayor and ex-mayor Fittler, well-known businessmen, and socially prominent figures. The views of the Delaware River from the porches of the inn were beautiful. The luncheon was elaborate. The grounds were lush, and the weather was perfect. This is the advertisement that appeared weekly in the Philadelphia Times in 1892. As you could see, you could book a single room with board from $20 weekly based on the view from the room. One could also book a suite and with a private parlor, 3 bedrooms, and a private bath and board from $100 a week. These prices, including the meals, sounds pretty great. But remember, this was 1892. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index, These charges in 2023 would be for a single room, $663 weekly, and for the suite, $3,317 weekly. Take note that the ad lists Alfred Lipp as proprietor. Although he was not the owner, he was the manager. He was hired by Morel based on references and a favorable interview. Opening day was a great success, due in part to Lipp. Day 2 was also a big hit. But day 3, Lipp didn't show up for work. It was established that Lipp left home for work Wednesday morning around 9 a.m. His plan was to place a meat order for the Morelton and then proceed to work. No one, not family, friends, or co-workers, knew where he was, but everyone, including the police, were looking for him. Morel checked the books and everything was in order. There was speculation that he was robbed and thrown in the river. Pinkerton detectives were hired to operate a nationwide search. Finally, 10 days after he disappeared, he was found by his brother and a Pinkerton detective in a hotel in New York City. He was brought home and the doctor was called. The doctor stated that he was much sicker than anyone knew and would not let anyone except family see him. He never returned to work at the Morelton, although this ad ran for the entire season. But William V. Massey, manager of Morel's business affairs, stepped in to manage the inn. This is William Burgess Massey. He was the manager and treasurer of the Morelton Inn. He was the president of the Tarsdale Times Publishing Company. Yeah, they had a newspaper. And he was also the secretary and treasurer of Tarsdale Land Improvement Company. This is the famous Morelton Inn, formerly the mansion house of Edward McAllister Hopkins. Many additions were made to the home in order to make it an inn. To the left of the main house is a double-decker covered pier where evening concerts were held. Cards were played and visitors lounged watching the boats float by. The main building of the inn held offices and some guest rooms, not too many. The next building was a dining room that fronted the river. It held 250 diners and every seat had a view of the river. The dinners served consisted of 8 courses. There's an addition that forms an L with the dining room that you can't really see from this photo. This addition held guest quarters. Let's tour the rest of the resort. The boat landing was an important part of Risdon's Hotel and Ferry, and it was just as important to the Morelton Inn. The steamboats of the Upper Delaware River Transportation Company stopped at Tarsdale several times daily. Edward Morel had Fiddler Street extended from State Road to the river for easy access for those going to the boat landing. The Riverside Cottage Annex consisted of 40 rooms for guests. It was formerly Samuel and Cecilia Grant's house. So that was right at the base of where Grant Avenue runs into just a lot now. This is a photo of one of the 7 long cottages built shortly before the inn opened. It was built to accommodate families. It featured 3 bedrooms, a living room, a parlor, a hall, and a bathroom. It seems to me to be a very big house for just what we're explaining was there. Lying between the Morelton Inn, Edward McAllister's home, and the Riverside Cottage Annex, the Grant House, was a 3-story stone and brick building standing very close to Quessing Street, which is now Milner Street. It's been cited as being Hopkins' stable. It's also been referred to as a guest house. The building was converted into 2 dwellings in 1932, which is what you see here, the 2 dwellings. And it was restored to a single unit in 1999. It was not uncommon for upscale resort communities in the late 19th century to have a casino as part of their amenities. Morelton's casino was fashioned after the popular Newport Casino in Newport, Rhode Island. Today, the Newport Casino is the site of the International Tennis Hall of Fame. Late 19th century casinos were not known as gambling halls. They were buildings constructed on the grounds of a larger establishment. Social and recreational activities such as card games, board games, lectures, music, and dancing were held at casinos. I don't doubt that a wager or two was made at the Morelton Casino, but that was a side benefit or a regret if you lost. It has also been well documented that the casino was a 2-floor building. The first floor was divided into a side for a women's club and a side for a men's club. The second floor consisted of a large dance hall. There was lawn tennis court on the front lawn. Nothing I read from the time that the casino operated gave any different description. However, modern accounts told a different story. Friends of mine said that their home had been the casino. At first, I thought, wow, that's cool. However, the more research I did, the more I questioned this. See how well you can see that. On the left is a photo of the front of the casino. On the right is a photo of the house. It's obvious that an addition has been added to the house. But if you look beyond that, the bones of the house look very different. Grand Avenue was open at that location, so there couldn't have been lawn tennis on the front lawn. In fact, there's no front lawn at all. I had been searching the 1894 GM Bromley Atlas since it was published closest to the Morelton Inn opening. Very recently, I realized that Wissinoming Street, which is where this casino stood at Wissinoming and Grant, did not exist in the 1894, as indicated by the dotted lines. It would be solid lines if the street was actually there. It was just a proposed street back then. When I examined the casino building on the 1887 atlas, things became clearer. By looking at things from a different perspective, I could see that it was the side of the casino that fronted Grant Avenue. The front would eventually be on Wissinoming Street, but in 1887, the casino frontage was an open area that extended all the way to Milner Street, with plenty of room for lawn tennis and scenic pathways throughout the resort. I don't know when the front door was sealed and a door placed on the Grand Avenue side, or when rooms were put on the second floor or additional rooms put on the first floor, and when the second floor porch was removed and the doors leading to that porch were sealed. But I feel confident now that this house was indeed the casino. To seal the deal, I recently read that the casino was formerly a stable on Henry and Clementine Bory's property, which this was. So those people that I have stated that this was not the casino in the past, I apologize. I was wrong. And especially to a Mr. Morrison, I think maybe his name was Paul, that I was speaking to at Glen Ford, who was very upset with my news. So he does not have to be upset anymore. He was right. And this is showing, without the ghost of the Wissinoming Street on the map, things look differently. You can see how you could put things on the front lawn and take it all the way down to Milner Street. So this was the casino as close up as I could get. This is the side that's on Milner now. There's no porch around it now. And it's very, very hard to take photos or anything because there's a lot of growth, a lot of trees and stuff. But, and the doors you can see on the second floor, there's windows and doors. And the doors have been sealed. And you can just about make out like where it had been with the brick. For those of us old enough to remember the society pages in the newspaper, there were weekly lists of those staying at the Morelton, where they were from, what the ladies were wearing, etc. Also, besides those that stayed at the inn, well-known social clubs used to meet there, such as the 5 o'clock Club, the Pen and Pencil Club, the Farmers Club of Torresdale. They held luncheons and dinners there, which gave a lot more business other than just those staying there. There were Saturday night dances every other Saturday, and people came to those dances, both local people, people that were staying there. They loved the dances, and a lot of times they would come for dinner before or even lunch and just hang around at the site. Probably the biggest event that was held at the Morelton Inn was the boat race between the University of Pennsylvania and Cornell University, held on June 15th, 1894. Huge crowds showed up at the end to cheer on the rowers at the finish line. Mr. Morrell had chairs set up on the lawns so that everyone could see, including the locals. However, the crowds were so large that the new ballroom that was built to be used for the first time that evening had to be pressed into service as a dining room. The orchestra entertained all evening from the inn's top pier. Shortly after the 1896 season, a notice appeared in the paper that the resort would be opening under the name of the Morelton Inn and Cottages, under the new management of Harry A. Chester, former manager of the Union League and the Rittenhouse Club. Did William Massey quit? Was he fired? He had been a good friend and a trusted employee of Edward Morrell. There are many plausible explanations for these changes. I have a few in mind, but there's no proof. When the inn opened in 1896, it was not under Harry Chester's management. Edward Morrell decided to lease the property rather than have someone manage it for him. It was now to be called the Morelton Inn and Annex, and the lessees were William Schumacher, previous manager of the University Club, and John T. Pesey, who had managed the Murray Cricket Club until it was destroyed by fire. Schumacher was to handle the office work, Pesey the stewardship. The 1896 Schumacher Pesey Morelton Inn and Annex was not successful. Neither was the 1897 Morelton under the management of O.E. Hansen in 1897. In the fall of 1897, 100 successful men from the area organized a gentleman's club to replace the Morelton Inn. It was to be called the Morelton Club. In March 1898, papers of incorporation were filed. The organizers were gung-ho initially. Easily recognizable names from the area like John Mack, Edward Morrell, Thomas Ellicott Cole, Charles Porter, Robert Forder, and Merrill Dobbins were just some of the names involved in the club. The club reorganized in 1902. It limped along until 1917 when the property owner and namesake, Edward Morrell, passed away. When the club opened in 1898, the Philadelphia Times reported, "The Morelton Inn is no more. It will be forgotten, but the club will not." I don't think a lot of people remember the Morelton Club, but in 1918, the Morelton Inn Corporation, as opposed to the original Morelton Inn Company, was chartered. It was a poor imitation of the original, and it closed in 1922. Also in 1922, Louise Morel sold the 2 Riverside cottages to 3 contractors and their wives. It would appear that their goal was to flip the property because they sold the buildings in 1925 to the Pennsylvania Society for the Advancement of the Deaf. And that school and home was at this location until the 70s. In 1925, Anthony A. Jordan, a real estate appraiser, sold the stone and brick 3-story building that stands on Milner Street, north of the Morelton Inn. The building would be the clubhouse for the Delaware River Yacht Club, which was chartered in 1926 and still exists today. You can see the picture that I took from Milner Street. Remember, I showed you earlier, it was a 2-dwelling unit. It was made 2 dwellings in 1932, and then they put it back in 1999 as a 1-dwelling unit. That's their symbol or whatever, it's on the building that with the boat on it. And this is a 1927 shot of the docks where boats were brought in. It is unknown exactly when the Morelton Inn Casino closed, but when it did, James Jordan, his wife Alwilda, and their daughter Alwilda moved into the building. They rented the home from the Morels. Jordan served as Morel's private secretary for over 30 years. More importantly, they were good friends. When Morel died in 1917 in Colorado Springs, where he had gone for his health, Jordan accompanied Mrs. Morel to bring his body home. Jordan died in this home that they rented. 1 month after his death, Mrs. Morel gifted the house to his wife. In August of 1923, Louise Morel sold the Morelton Inn to Francis J. and Mary Teresa Thron. Mrs. Morel stipulated that the proceeds from the sale go to Dennis Cardinal Doherty, Archbishop of Philadelphia. Edward S. McCraig held the mortgage on the property. On November 17, 1924, Lydia DeMetz bought the mortgage from McCraig. The Throns ran the hotel under the name Morelton Inn, as it was originally called. Unfortunately, the inn went into foreclosure on September 10, 1828. This picture here I got from one of the ancestors of the Throns, and you can see more clearly now the L shape of the hotel, where the pillars are. That's the front of the inn itself, and then these annexes that are attached to it, and then make the L shape. George V. Mitchell purchased the inn from Thomas F. Cunningham, sheriff, on October 1st, 1928. Then on May 21st, 1929, there was a multi-transaction deal on the property. D. Bernard Hefferman bought it from Mitchell. Louis and Ida Dorsey purchased it from Hefferman, and Paul and Eva Heenan became the next owners that same day. Paul J. Heenan Jr. was a well-known architect and the son of a prominent contractor. In 1912, he became a partner in the firm of Heenan and Boyle. This firm was known for its work on Catholic projects. two of which were West Catholic High School and LaSalle College, now university. In 1921, he became president of Hoffman Heenan Company. This firm became famous for the theaters that they designed. Some of these were the Mastbaum Memorial Theater, the Prince Music Theater, Stanley Theater, the Bristol Riverside Theater, and Playhouse in the Park, also known as the John B. Kelly Playhouse. In the 9 years that the Heenans lived in the house, they made unbelievable changes to the exterior and I'm assuming the interior. So it's very interesting. You just wouldn't even believe that this is the same house. On the left was the old Morelton Inn with the mansard roof and the pier that you can't see completely from this picture. And to the right is what it looks like today, basically. The high pillars in the front, the gable roof, still has, there's no dining room there to the right anymore. It's a 5-car garage, and it was built with a 3-room quarters above it for a chauffeur. The Heenans sold Morelton in 1938 to the American Chemical Paint Company. I have no idea why they would want to move out of this beautiful house after all the work that they had done. I also have no idea what a chemical paint company was going to do with the house. Although in 1936, the president of American Chemical Paint Company paid off all of his employees' debt, their mortgages, everything, as a Christmas gift. And in his will, he left his company stock in trust to those employees. Maybe he purchased the Morelton for the use of his employees. I just don't know. In 1946, Morelton flipped again. Theodore F. Ziegler purchased it on August 21st, and then Martin Harvey purchased it from him on August 28th. Wilhelm Nauer served as Pennsylvania Deputy Attorney General, and Virginia Harrington Nauer served for 8 years as the first female Republican elected to Philadelphia City Council. She also served as Chief Consumer Advisor to Pennsylvania Governor Ray Schaefer. She also served as Special Assistant to the President for Consumer Affairs from 1969 to 1977. And she then served as the Director of the United States Office of Consumer Affairs from 1981 to 1989. And they purchased Morelton Inn in 1946. Wilhelm grew up in the Holmesburg neighborhood of Philadelphia. As a young man, he dreamed of owning China Hall, an historic home in Croydon, Pennsylvania. He couldn't possibly afford it. Eventually, another historic home, Morelton, was for sale in Torresdale, which was just above Holmesburg, so he was familiar with it. Virginia and, I said 46 before, they purchased it in 48. By that time, China Hall was for sale, but it was deteriorated greatly. The Nauers had the interior of China Hall taken apart and piece by piece and installed into Morelton. And this is a print by William Russell Birch of China Hall in Croydon. It was also known as a China Retreat. Well, I'm sorry. It's not there. Wilhelm died in 1976. In 1977, Virginia sold Morelton to move to Washington, D.C., where she worked and to be closer to her daughter, Valerie. Morelton was purchased by Larry and Helga McGargle. Helga was an ophthalmologist, retired now, and the late Larry was a vascular surgeon. He graduated from Temple Medical School in 1969. He was the co-director of the Retina Vascular Unit at Wills Eye Hospital. They named their home Morelton Manor. That's the end of the presentation, but I have pictures, current pictures from the Morelton Manor, which you might be very interested in, because there were no interior pictures of the Morelton Inn or anything. And let me show you. This is the entranceway. Those, the front door and the windows above it and all came from China Hall. The paneling and wainscoting and everything from China Hall. This is one view of the living room, just beautiful. Another view from the living room. This is in the dining room. It's a fireplace that was made from Pennsylvania blue marble. And as you can see, inlaid in it, there's a fresco of George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. This is the stairway going to the second floor with the beautiful Palladian windows that look out over the Delaware. This is, I called it the master bedroom. I don't know whether it was or not, but different views of that. And you can see the doorway leading into the bathroom, which is all tiled. This is a picture of another bedroom. There's more bedrooms, but they were, being used by the family, so we didn't want to intrude. This on the left is a stairway going down to Fittler Street, what was Fittler Street, and it would take people to the boat landing. The picture on the right shows a high wall and this dirt road that was Fittler Street before it was stricken from the city plan. And you have to remember that the Delaware River is tidal. So, you had to ensure that it wasn't going to come in and flood the place, hence the wall. Gorgeous, gorgeous landscaping on the property. As you can see, the one on the left was taken from a third-story window. And you see these steps going through the property. This is a little grotto. There's water in it. I don't know whether there's any fish, but, and a statue of a little girl reading. On the left are riverfront gardens, and you can see an area where people can sit out by the river. To the left there, the boats, that's the Delaware River Yacht Club. And the wonderful swimming pool, doesn't that look good on the right? And I want to thank all those through history that preserved, maintained, lived in, and loved Morelton. And a special thanks to Helga McGargle, who allowed us to have a peek at her spectacular home and grounds. Helga is here today, and she's not going to stand up. She told me she's not going to stand up, but it's spectacular. The home is absolutely spectacular, as I'm sure it was back in the day, where all the socially prominent were flocking to see it. Thanks.
Hey, that was fascinating, Patty. So the way we work this is we open it to questions. We take a question from the live audience, and then we take one from the Zoom audience. So does anybody have a question? Dan?
Yeah, Patty, when the inn first opened in the 1880s,
90s.
90s, what would, there were no cars. So how did people get there, and were there carriage houses if they had horse and buggy?
Okay, people had three actually, ways to get there. They could take the train and be picked up at the train and driven to the inn. They could come up the Delaware on one of the steamboats and get off there right at the inn. Or they could, there was a coach service daily from I don't know whether it was, I can't remember now, whether it was the Bellevue or the Stratford. It was one or the other, it wasn't both. And that was actually driven daily by Edward Morel. He was a real horseman. He had a tally-ho, which is a four-in-hand carriage. And he just loved to drive, to race, to do anything. So he would drive down and pick people up and bring them back. So they had various ways. If they drove their horses or brought their own carriages, there was a place over by the Tarsdale train station where they could be kept.
Lou, can we get the chat box up so we can see some of the questions in the chat? I did see one earlier, Patty, if you could talk about the Tarsdale with an I versus Tarsdale with an E.
Okay. In Scotland, it was spelt with an I, and that's where he got the name from. It was one of his family's homes. And if you look up McAllister with, Scottish roots, McAllister is more often spelt with an I, McAllister. I don't know whether they always put I's before S's or what the deal was, but it didn't last very long at all. Like the first couple deeds had the I, and then it quickly switched over to the E, and it's been E ever since.
So that was a chat. Is there anybody? Sam, you want to?
Patty, you mentioned the name John Johnson very early in the presentation of the lawyer. Is this the John Johnson who represented Widener? You know?
John Johnson John G. Johnson was a phenomenal attorney, corporate attorney. I think it is said that he never lost a case and he had a photographic memory. And he was Edward Morel's stepfather. Until he met her, Edward's mother, he just worked all the time. No social life, nothing. And she kind of opened him up a little, and he began to be an art collector. And they traveled through Europe collecting unbelievable art. And in his will, he actually bought the house next door because he had so much art. He put it in the bathrooms. He put it on the headboards. He put it on the back of doors. I mean, these are priceless works of art. And in his will, he said that it had to be kept in the house. Well, the city of Philadelphia kind of worked its way around his will, as they did with the Barnes Museum. And it actually is, his collection is the foundation of the art museum here today.
Is that the same John G. Johnson? Yeah. You could have said yes.
I'm sorry.
I was going to say that because the art museum would not create the John Johnson wing, Peter A.B. Widener and his son Joseph and their lawyer said, screw you, we're taking our collection to the National Gallery in Washington.
Okay, so going back to the chat box, I want to know what were the, quote, special inducements for bachelors that were in the ads. That's a loaded question.
Okay. The house that McAllister gifted to his two nieces was at the corner of Wissanoming and Fittler. And it was a very large home. And Morel bought that, and it was made the bachelor annex. Now, I don't know what happened to family sons, whether they were just left to do what they wanted, but parents of girls that had just entered society or were getting ready to, they brought their daughters up, maybe hoping to make a match with these very wealthy bachelors that were coming up. So I think that was the biggest inducement for them, that they might find a wealthy bride.
I think the questioner had a different inducement in mind, but that's a good. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
You had on the screen pictures of Virginia Nauer and Wilhelm Nauer.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
You had on the screen pictures of Virginia Nauer and
Yeah.
Wilhelm Nauer. Did they reside at Glenford Mansion, the current Glenford Mansion? No, they didn't. Okay, I'm confusing them with someone.
So this talk was about the Morelton Inn, which is south of Glenford. The Nauers lived in the Morelton, not in Glenford, never lived in Glenford. Okay, let me see. Can't read this too well. The Nauers were close friends of my family. I have copies of letters and a will that they signed as what? Oh, you just scrolled as witnesses for Dr. William H. Morrison Jr. Well, whoever you are, we would love to see those those archives. So, any other? Here's a microphone.
Okay, I have three short questions.
Okay.
Speak
One,
right into speaking to the mic.
You mentioned a fellow who was associated with LaSalle College.
Mhm.
Who was that?
Paul J. Heenan. He was an architect, and he did in his partnership with Boyle, Heenan and Boyle, they did a lot of churches, Catholic schools, things like that. They had a very there are quite a number of architectural firms that deal solely in churches and things like that, and they were one of them at the
Was
time.
he a graduate of LaSalle?
No, he built
He
LaSalle.
built LaSalle, I
Yeah.
see. Secondly, you said that Mr. Morel had a powerhouse for Torresdale. So where was that?
I don't know. I don't
May
know.
have been in Tickle.
They said that it was brought up
Hmm.
into
Okay.
Torresdale. See, a lot of this, buying the steamships, having the coaching service from town, the electricity, the phone brought up from Frankfurt and all, these had like a dual purpose. He wanted to make this resort of his the best around, but also you have to remember he lived there. So he was able to get a lot of things passed through city council so that his own home was greatly improved. Now,
He
he,
also was at Trolley Parks.
yes, he had a company that
Okay.
did that, but it went from the Red Line Inn up to Bristol. He had a company that paved roads, which a lot of the paving wasn't like we know it now. It was more like different size stones and layers of stones and all. He paved some of the roads. Other roads he kept as turf roads because of his love of horses and of his guests that wanted to go for rides and everything. They did better on the turf. So, I mean, he was a very smart businessman. He was making a lot of money with these improvements that he was doing, but he was also improving his own home.
And also the last question, there's a church shown. Is that church still there? Or Presbyterian?
It's McAllister Presbyterian Church. And Charles McAllister left in his will the money for a church to be built. The rules were, I guess, by the Presbyterian Church, that you had to have 10 members in your congregation. Well, it wasn't a Presbyterian neighborhood other than McAllister. So it took a long time. So he died in 73. McAllister did. It wasn't until the 80s that they had enough of a congregation to build the church, which they did. It was right next to the casino. Yeah. And now it has been moved and it is on Morel Avenue. A little bit.
West of Frankfurt Avenue.
Yes, west of Frankfurt. It might be the second street that you come to when you're coming off of Frankfurt Avenue. It's on your right.
Yeah.
Maybe West Crown, yeah. Yes.
Hancock.
It's right across from Hancock School. It's a small brick church. It's called McAllister.
McAllister Presbyterian Church or
No,
something.
it's called McAllister Tarsdale Presbyterian Church.
But there's a for sale. I think it's
There is a
closed.
for sale
I
sign.
think that's where her house was, the Drexel's house, Morel's house.
Morel's house.
It was right there.
Could have been.
I was very little. I'm gonna say
Wait, hold on. People in Zoom can't hear you, so talk into the mic.
When I was small, back in the 50s, my brothers and I went to the McAllister Church on Grand Avenue for Sunday school. So I've been in the building on your map. I don't know if the building's still there or not.
No, it's not. There's 3 homes, I think, that are, there on Grand Avenue now, modern homes. Yeah, well, they said they moved it, so I'm guessing it's the same one that it was. They didn't move the church? Oh, okay.
Okay, right there. The dining room of the Union League at Tarsdale Golf Course is called McAllister's. That's true, and it's in tribute to Charles McAllister. Any other questions here?
Behind you too, John.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Edward Morel, did they name Morel Avenue after him?
Well, yeah, the whole neighborhood is named for the Morel family.
I have an issue with that because, it's named after, everyone says after Edward Morel. Edward Morel died in 1917. His wife did not die till 1945. I think if anyone had any real memories of the Morels, it was of her. She was a very generous, good person. So everyone will say it's named after him, but I think it's named after her.
Stand corrected. Yeah. Right. We've been Patty and Fred have been in contact. He's the descendant of the early owner, and we're hoping to get.
I think he's a grandson. And
you know,
Blair, if you can hear me, I have tried to get a hold of you so many times because I wanted more information from you.
All right. All right. One more question to.
Across from Carsdale train station, is that the original entrance to Glenford?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. And
Well, I know there's a house on the other side of the creek. There's a house there. Was that a caretaker's house?
it was right. Where those the entranceway was right there. Beyond that, west of that to the train station was where the livery stable was for the Morelton Inn. People would either drive up or they would be picked up or, dropped off right there. But so it really butted up against.
Who had the Tarsdale train station put there? Was that Morel did that or?
No, I don't. I think that was just the railroad, but it was named after McAllister's Tarsdale.
Okay, I think there are some more questions, but we got to wrap up. So thanks so much, everybody. Join us for refreshments and conversation. And I hope to see you on June 7th for the tour of the GAR Museum.